Late night security guards or people who work the graveyard shift. What's the scariest, paranormal, thing you've experienced? I don't work the graveyard shift. I'm a teacher. But I frequently stayed late during the winter months to try and catch up on work. Sometimes I don't leave until 7 o'clock-ish and by then it's pitch dark outside. Many times while thus alone I have heard children giggling. I've gone through the building, room by room, looking for the source since the idea of little kids locked in overnight is not pleasant. Never can find anyone. The doors and windows are locked and no sign of anyone outside. Asked around and it seems lots of fellow staff who have stayed later than normal have heard the laughter, as well as other sounds. Now when I hear the giggles I use my teacher voice, and tell them to keep it down. Seems to work, so I'm fine with that. I'm a truck driver that works a midnight to noon shift. A few months back I was driving through the mountains in California at around 0300 headed for Reno. Up ahead next to the road I noticed what I could only describe as an abomination. It stood on two legs and looked like a monster out of a nightmare. My blood turned cold and I felt fear overcome me as I approached it as it just stood there next to the road looking at me. After the longest 3 seconds of my life I realized it was a deer that was facing away from me with its body turned around so it could lick its own ass. I occasionally work the overnight shift as a security guard at a distribution warehouse. We're in a little shack out in the yard, checking trailers in and out. On more than one occasion I have caught the reflection of different people in the windows glass doors of our shack. When I turn to look, there's no one there. Every inch of this area is under surveillance. No one ever shows up on video when I review the footage. I just ignore it these days. Oh, I got one. I was working late at night at Colonial Williamsburg. It was my job to turn off the lights at the governor's mansion and a few other places at the end of the night. I got done and was walking to my car and my boss called me and said that I had missed a light. I was pretty new so I just said yes sir and headed back. Sure enough, a light way up in the attic was visibly on from outside. So I went to the top floor and climbed up there on the little ladder. Once up there were no lights on. I didn't think too much of it at this point so I went all the way down and back outside. Once outside again I started back to my car. My boss shot me a text and asked if I was going to take care of it or not. I told him I did and he was upset because he thought I was lying. I headed back to the mansion and sure enough the light was on. I headed all the way back up there and the light was off again. I was literally staring out the window that was lit from the outside. At this point I figured someone was screwing with me so I headed back out in a huff. I got downstairs and my boss met me at the door upset. Are you going to turn that dang light out or what? It was out. Are you screwing with me? So we both head up there and the light was off. But there was the distinct odor of a candle and what appears to be the haze of smoke around the window. I've got such a good one for this. About 1997 I got a job as a security guard and was immediately put on night shift for training. The front lobby of the office building I was working in was under renovations and basically just tarped off from the sidewalk. Part of my duties was to walk through the lobby to make sure no one was trespassing or ripping off anything from the area under construction. As I was walking through the area where they were installing a new revolving door my eye caught some movement directly above me. I immediately pointed my flashlight straight up and saw a man in a suit hanging upside down, his face about 3 feet from mine and looking right at me with his eyes wide open. For just a few seconds I was more freaked out than I have ever been in my life. I was a bit jumpy to begin with as this was my first time as security on night shift so my brain took a moment to process what was happening. It was my own stupid reflection in the shiny new mirrored steel finish of the not quite fully installed revolving door looking down at me. Never been so terrified in my entire life as I was in those 5 seconds. Dumbass. Stocking at Kmart. Lights were motion sensors. Randomly lights on the empty side of the store would go on. There were only 3 of us so it's not like someone was there. I used to work overnights at a halfway house. One time me and a coworker were chatting and see on camera a guy walking down an alley behind our place. The alley was our building, and a brick building on the other side with no doors. We thought one of our residents were running away, pretty common. So I told my coworker to keep watching the cameras and he'll see who it is. The cameras were on the same fixture. One looking north, one looking south with the only blind spot was right underneath them. I walk out to see who it is, and there's no one in the alley. I radio back to my coworker, and she says he disappeared off one camera and never appeared on the other one. So has to be in the blind spot. He wasn't. There are no doors in that blind spot or dumpsters, drains, anything. He literally just vanished. The only doors on their building were about 40 yards in each direction, both on camera. He literally just vanished. When I was younger I used to work as a security guard in the Musée du Louvre, where the Mona Lisa is. I worked the day shift. It was my part-time student job, and I heard some spooky stories from the night shift crew. There was this corridor with sword on both sides and this security guy was walking by with his torchlight and suddenly something pulled his jacket that made him almost fall. He turned around and nothing was there. He was screaming on his walkie-talkie and someone had to go up and bring him to the main room. They checked the cameras and saw that his jacket just got pulled mid-air. The next day when they reported to the chief of security he told them to disregard this. And since that day they always do their rounds by 2 security guards. And there are many more stories from that place. We should not forget that many people died in the Musée du Louvre of violent death. I was the third shift receptionist to a dorm that shared space with a 50s-themed diner. Though the restaurant was empty, the jukebox would occasionally play the Scorpions' Rock You Like a Hurricane at full volume. Wasn't every night, but almost always around 3 a.m. I used to work the 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift as a nursing assistant. About 15 years ago, I worked the surgical floor, so most patients were post-op, but they would send up overflow from time to time, so we did have a death on occasion. Hospitals are generally well-staffed at night, so I didn't spend a ton of time alone, but as an assistant, things like bathing people and changing beds was part of my job. One night I was giving a patient a bath. He was elderly and barely there in all senses, when I heard knocking. I checked the door and no one was around, so I shrugged it off and went back to work. Again knocking, but it didn't sound like the door. The third time I realized it was coming from the window. At first this confused me, so I just opened up the blinds thinking maybe some kids were running around playing a joke. There were apartments nearby and kids are weird. When I opened the blinds I suddenly remembered we were on the second floor overlooking the parking lot. This sent a chill down my spine, and I waited to see if there was any movement or reasonable explanation. When nothing presented itself, I just freaked out internally and shut the blinds. I tried rushing through the rest of the bed bath, hoping it was over. When the knocking happened again, I didn't go look. I finished up, grabbed my stuff and got out of there. He ended up passing away a few hours later. I told a few coworkers, and they didn't seem surprised. Just kinda said that weird stuff happened like that, and you get used to it. Worked overnight at a large corporate office, and one night while doing rounds, checking doors, stairways, boiler rooms, there is a long hallway maybe 400 feet, with offices on both sides and a large window at the end. I am walking down looking into the offices, and in the window on the door I see what looks to be someone standing behind me. I brush as my reflection, and continue on. While walking down the hallway I look at my reflection in the large window and continue to see something that looks like I have a second head. I start to do my rounds a little faster, getting more creeped out. Then my partner in the camera room talks over the radio asking me if an office employee is walking with me. I noped out of there and asked for a transfer the next day. Years ago I worked as an orderly in a small hospital on the night shift. Most of the work was just answering call lights and cleaning up messes. We had one room whose call light would go off seemingly on its own. Patients in the room would deny pushing it, or it would go off when the room was empty. The story the older nurses told was of an elderly lady who spent a lot of time in that room before she passed, and it's her asking for help. We all laughed about it, and it was a long time running joke, and whenever anything peculiar happened in that room it was just attributed to Vicky look for attention. 35 years have passed since that time, and after a career I find myself working in the same hospital as a retirement job. Vicky's room has since been converted into a surgical area. Bright and shiny and new, but whenever I pass that area and all of the lights are off, I swear, out of the corner of my eye I can see someone standing in the parkour. I know it's an optical illusion, but it still gives me shivers. I recently told this story to a friend who has worked here all this time, and now whenever I see her she swats me for telling her the story because she has started seeing Vicky out of the corner of her eye too. I work in a building that's built on old state mental hospital property. We're next to a field. The entire building has cameras, so I am able to see almost everything. Nothing too big. Lights flicker occasionally. See shapes in the corner of your vision. Hear footsteps but no one on camera. But my coworker had a good one. She brought her 6-month-old dog into work and went on a walk with him in the field. She was probably just 50 feet from the building when her dog starts growling at nothing. About 10 seconds later, dog just books it to the building, leaving a trail of crap behind him. Coworker runs after him and the dog is shivering. For a good while after the incident, dog would steer clear of men. He was just fine before this, but afterwards every time a man got near, he would drop his ears and tail and hide. I supervise the cashier area in a casino, and I've always worked grave. Back then we used to close the floor at 4 a.m. I was working one night with an assistant and she had to run home for a bit about 5 a.m. I was just finishing up paperwork, so I didn't mind. I was standing up and my hair was kind of in my face. I was concentrating on my paperwork when for a split second I thought my hair had moved, but I realized that it was one of the cashier swivel chairs slowly spinning. I stared at it until it stopped, kind of frozen with confusion as to how it happened. So I was feeling kind of creeped out, so I sat down, figuring it'll just wait until my assistant got back. Then surveillance called and were like, "Did you see that?" We kind of laughed about it like, WTF was that? I wish that video got saved, but I don't know if they ever did save it because this was well over 10 years ago when they were still using tape that was wiped every 2 weeks. Definitely a WTF moment. Not me, but I worked with a family who cleaned offices overnight. During the summer they would bring their kids along, and their oldest kept pointing at something in the corner and asking why that man kept staring at him. They also experienced doors shutting and lights turning off. It may not have been paranormal, but it definitely freaked them out. I worked day shift security at a museum, historical village in Michigan. The houses had been moved across the country from various places and put all in one place. Many of them were hundreds of years old. There were houses where you would walk into and hear footsteps walking around upstairs. This is when we were closed and the buildings were locked up. Also, there were houses that I would walk into and feel like I am not welcome here and need to leave immediately. On the flip side, there were houses that I could walk into when having a crappy day and I would always be in a better mood when I left. I would talk to the night shift guards and they would tell you about the lights and voices they would experience in the museum at night. We have the chair that Lincoln was sitting in when he was shot and the car that Kennedy was riding in when he was shot. They swore up and down that you would hear and see things around both of them at night. Counselor at a psychiatric hospital. I work a ton of night shift, and some spooky things tend to happen. You'll hear a door creaking open, and one of the patients leans out, exposing half his face. He's staring at me and whispering something I couldn't hear from that distance. Naturally, I ask him if he is doing okay and if he needs something. He doesn't respond, but very slowly leans back into his room and closes the door. This repeated itself a few times during that night. It's a story I like to tell to people who ask me what I do for a living, because in hindsight I find it quite amusing. At the moment though, it freaked me the hell out.
Like, subscribe, and check out our TikTok for more content. See you next time.